Well, good Thursday morning inspiration for today, family. Can you believe we are already 5 days in to 2023? It's going to be a fast year. Let's not waste it. So we have been talking about the need to make goals. God is a God of fresh beginnings, and He gives nature a fresh beginning when spring comes. You know, He's given us a fresh beginning right now with the brand new year. So we've been talking about every day making resolutions or goals. And I know if we do that, we're more likely to make progress in our lives. So we talked about our physical side and our emotional side. Today, I want us to talk about our spiritual side. Now, when you say spiritual side, how does that work? Well, let me just start with a verse for the day, and we'll go from there. Acts at 2:42, it says this, and they, that is the very first Christians, continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in prayers. I know we can't underline because we don't have an outline, but concentrate on those very first. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. Or another way of saying it, in the teaching and the study of God's word together. But those words continued. When He continued, it wasn't a one-time deal. You know, they had all just become believers. That's Acts chapter 2. Early on, when Peter preached, 3,000 became followers of Christ on that very first day. But their faith did not stop right there. No, it continued. It went on. And I use this phrase. I've been reading a lot of A.W. I always have read a lot of A.W. Tozer. And a lot of the thoughts for today's passage come from one of his books that's listed in here, the best of. And he's talking about this whole chapter on faith is a journey, not a destination. Faith is a journey, not a destination. We don't just become believers and then stop and go lay down and wait to die. No, we're to continue in our faith. In fact, we're supposed to grow in our faith. And Tozer talks a lot about that word steadfastly. It's an effort word. Now, granted, they truly needed to in that first century and in those early stages. And you know why? Because of persecution. And in persecution, many of them lost their worldly possessions were taken away. Some were slain. And in Acts chapter 8 at verse 1, it says they were scattered throughout the whole world. Many because of persecution. Of course, God used that for good because that's how Christianity spread so fast. But as far as the individuals, because of persecution, they lost everything, including their homes at times. They needed to continue steadfastly in their faith. And so are we. You know, it's becoming harder and harder in this day and age to stand up for godly principles and to follow Christ. And I don't know how much persecution will come to this country. I pray not. But you just never know. But we have to continue to grow in our faith. In fact, this is not just a casual thing. No. In 1 Peter chapter 2, he says this, like newborn babies, crave the spiritual milk so that you may grow up in your salvation now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. Peter is encouraging us to grow up in our faith. Don't just let the spiritual, a lot of times we get ideas how we can improve our health or our body, and maybe you made some resolution a couple days ago. I hope you did in that area. But it's not just our body, it's our spiritual side of life also needs to stay healthy and to grow. And the Bible encourages us to do that, not just stay mere babes of the faith, but to gain spiritual maturity. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of ways to do that. I've thought of several. One that I would mention, sometimes we grow in our faith the most when we step out and take on a ministry that we've never done before. You have to grow when you do that. So I applaud anything where you step out and serve. God will use it to mature, help your faith grow. But other things that you can do, maybe you make a resolution that in this calendar year, you don't miss church. How about that? I remember when I was a young kid and my parents were dropping me off at a Baptist church. And they said that if you get perfect attendance, you get pins. Oh man, you'd think those were made of gold. I had to have that. I wanted perfect attendance. And one time I remember my grandmother, I went to stay with my grandmother for the weekend, and they told me if I would bring a bulletin from that church, that would count as my attendance. And I did that. And eventually I got a 3-month perfect attendance pin. And I wore that thing so proudly. You know what? I'd love to get a perfect attendance pin for this year of not missing a Sunday. I'd love that. We don't do that. We don't take attendance. But I know that God notices when you go and worship him, and he is pleased. And you know, when you do that, it helps you grow in your faith. Yes, part of it is being exposed to good biblical teaching from Pastor Andy or whoever is teaching on that Sunday. What about maybe reading through the Bible? How about that? I don't know how the Lord's going to lead you, but have some goal. You know, it only takes reading 3 chapters a day, and you'll read through the Bible in a year. And you know what? Surveys show that many Christians have never done that. Now, you don't have to read through in a year. There's no timetable on it. Maybe you'd like to take 3 years so that you can dig deeper and think about what you're reading. That's great. Read 1 chapter a day, and you'll read the whole Bible in 3 years. 3 years. You can do it. You can do it. And I've done both, the 1 year and the 3-year plans. I like them both. Take 10, 15 minutes a day, and you can do that. And you have that time. Maybe you start to read really good theology. Of course, my favorite theologian in our day is Tozer. And I've been reading, we carry this book and many others of his in our bookstore. The best of A.W. Tozer, who lived in the 50s and 60s, and he lived closely to God. And he had such a great picture of who God is. I love reading Tozer because I feel closer to God every time I do. Every time I learn something new about the Lord. I encourage you. I just finished a year-long daily devotional that took me maybe 5 minutes a day to read of his. Pick up a Tozer book from our bookstore. You'll be glad you did. Hey, our time is about up for today, and tomorrow is the most important day of the week as we look at the biggest new beginning in all of history. See you then.